The Putin regime is entering a kind of transition toward getting into the shape it wants to be in for a time when Putin is about to die, leave, or lose power. This has been happening the other way around for years. People have been trying to get themselves into the position they want to be in when Putin loses power. But we're talking about it from Putin's point of view. Putin is assembling a formation he wants to have around him that is there to keep the fort when things get rocky for him biologically or politically. This is not about Putin wanting to pass over power to somebody else. Putin desperately does not want to pass over power to anybody. He wants to keep it for as long as it is physically possible. But he is not naive. He knows that he cannot secure a stable and procedurally predictable transition. But for that moment, when he is weak or when he's about to expire, he wants to have the right kind of assemblage around him to hold the fort for as long as possible. These are going to be the last people to hold the line for him when he's right at the end. So that's what this is all about. And this gets more complex because Putin's fort has to contain mini forts inside it, which counterbalance each other to prevent some mini forts becoming disloyal to Putin. So that mini fort A checks mini fort B, and mini fort B checks mini fort C. So Patrushev checks Belousov and Belousov checks Mishustin. This is an age-old Putinite technique, stability through a series of managed conflicts inside the regime. Now you saw that method get out of control when Putin's balancing off of Prigozhin against Shoigu and Gerasimov got out of control, with Prigozhin losing the plot and marching on Moscow, something that could have succeeded in toppling Putin if only Prigozhin had a clear ideological vision. So according to what principles does Putin want to fill out his fort and the mini forts inside it? It's best to think of these principles as a series of conflictive demands, the first of which is a conflict between effectiveness and loyalty. Now you might say, why would Putin put anybody in there who isn't loyal? Well, here is the distinction. There are some people in there who wouldn't be in there unless Putin thought they were effective. There are other people who he perceives as so loyal that they need to be there whether they're effective or not. Up to a point, this distinction maps on to the substitution of Shoigu for Belousov. Belousov is in on the value of effectiveness. He is there secondarily to economize the military and primarily to militarize the economy. Meanwhile, Shoigu may have failed Putin, but he never betrayed Putin. And he's been shifted sideways to head of the Security Council, a position not only one in which Putin is happy to see him, but a position in which Shoigu may feel in the medium term safer than he would have felt in the position of Minister of Defense. Let's move on to the second principle that Putin is balancing: designated roles versus weights of importance. Mr. Mishustin, the Prime Minister, has a designated role. He does what Putin wants his Prime Minister to do. But Mr. Patrushev is there partly to be Mr. Patrushev. To some extent, it doesn't matter that he has been shifted to aid to the presidential administration, because his position might as well be called Director of Kremlin Paperclips or Chief Conspirologist in Residence. He is in part there because of his weight of importance rather than because he is specifically tied to fulfilling a designated role. We need to think of the Putin regime as a board of a corporation that partly has people with roles, but partly has people who don't have roles. They're not sitting there as the chief financial officer. They're sitting there just with a weight of importance. They're there not in a role, but in the position of being the number 4 guy on the board. Let's do the third principle that informs the way Putin thinks about building out his mini forts, and that is the conflict between politicization and depoliticization. Some people in Putin's regime, for instance the Kovalchuk brothers, may be drifting in a direction where entrepreneurially and preemptively Mr. Dugin is waiting for them.
Это онтологический уровень русского дизайна.
That direction is about fascicizing the Russian population into feeling that they are an active part of a project of collective self-realization predicated on a vast conflict with the West. But there are also members of Putin's administration, like Mr. Kiriyenko, who prefer to play about with political candidates like Mr. Nadezhdin as a piece of political technology designed to make the population feel that they can keep getting on with their lives and nothing much has changed since 2022. Mr. Putin's own view is that the course should be politicization, but that it shouldn't be traveled too quickly, and the regime can't entirely control how ready the population is to go there. Let's move on to the fourth principle that Putin is using to arrange his mini-forts, and that's a conflict between verticalizing power and outsourcing power. Up until the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Putin sustained himself by outsourcing presidential powers to his court, allowing the court to conflict about how to use that power, and then coming in to referee and arbitrate those conflicts. One of the many reasons Putin invaded Ukraine is to confiscate back power he had outsourced, because his capacity to arbitrate and referee the conflicts occurring within his courts had weakened. Today, Putin is split between the outsourcing and the verticalizing model, but eventually he will be forced to make a choice. I believe that the four principles we've looked at show the seriousness of Putin as a political operator, and we have to understand that we do best when we know our enemy. And they also show the regime's impressive capacity for self-stabilization. However, the longer the Putin regime stays in power, because it is a maniacal imperialist project that has nothing to offer, not only to the world, but to the Russian population, the longer that regime stays in power, the harder it will be for Russia to go through a period of decolonization that successfully answers the question, what holds all Russians together? Therefore, the perpetuation of Putin's regime increases the likelihood of Russia losing its territorial integrity. To understand whether the chances of Russia losing its territorial integrity are closer to 0 or nearer to 50%, and whether that event would be a global calamity or a kind of liberation, watch this video next.